This podcast is brought to you by Three Rivers Energy Partners. In today's episode of Digest This.
They're working with intermediate crops, things like camelina and safflower, to produce low-carbon intensity oils.
Creating power on site and potentially even feeding back into the grid.
They've issued an emergency waiver to permit E15 gasoline, gas blended with 15% ethanol during the summer months.
Welcome to Digest This, Unpacking Our Sustainable Future, where we dive deep into the latest developments in sustainability and renewable energy. Join us in exploring the pioneering solutions and technologies that are shaping our future. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
So, here's the thing. Renewable fuels are having their moment right now. And it's not just because the planet seriously needs it, but because companies like Repsol and Bunge are figuring out truly innovative ways to make it happen. Get this. According to a recent Repsol and Bunge press release, they're working with intermediate crops, things like camelina and safflower, to produce low carbon intensity oils. Pretty wild, right?
It's fascinating, and those crops are game changers. Camelina and safflower aren't just low maintenance, they're also designed to thrive on fallow land. That means farmers aren't displacing food crops, which has been a huge concern in biofuel production. Plus, these crops can help improve soil health and even boost biodiversity. So they aren't just environmentally friendly. They're environmentally restorative.
Wait, improving soil health? Like the crops are actually making the soil better?
Exactly. These plants can integrate into crop rotations, which means farmers are building more sustainable systems while also getting a new revenue stream. And that's why Spanish farmers are a central part of this project. They're providing the feedstocks that Repsol is converting into renewable fuels using advanced technologies.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so cool to see how these European farmers, many of whom have been farming the same land for generations, are now playing such a modern, pivotal role in the renewable fuel movement. What Repsol and Bunge are doing is pretty ambitious. It is incredible to see how motivated the farming community was to adopt new practices when there was genuine economic and ecological value.
It shows how impactful these partnerships can be. They mentioned that emissions reductions are up to 90% compared to conventional diesel. Those numbers are impressive. Pair that with sustainable practices that support farmers, and it's clear that collaborations like this aren't only about hitting decarbonization targets. They're also about creating resilient systems that can adapt to future challenges.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation. Better income streams for farmers, healthier land, and low-carbon fuels. We're talking about systemic change here. And honestly, I can't wait to see how this sparks even more innovation in the ag and energy sectors. Speaking of innovation in energy systems, have you heard about this data center project in Upper Burrell? TECfusions is taking a bold step by generating their own power using natural gas from wells on the property. According to a recent article in TribuLive, TECfusions is talking about 2 gigawatts of electricity, with plans to scale that up to 3 gigawatts. I mean, that's massive, almost on par with nuclear-sized generation levels.
It is, and it's a bold move to root such a significant operation in natural gas. On one hand, there's the benefit of energy independence, creating power on site, and, potentially, even feeding back into the grid. But on the other hand, we have to ask what the long-term environmental trade-offs might be. Natural gas, even when used efficiently, isn't exactly a renewable choice.
Right. And you've got people who are, skeptical about how sustainable this really is. But at the same time, they're avoiding a heavier pull on the grid, which already has its own challenges with big energy users like data centers. Doesn't that count for something?
It does, especially when you consider the growing demand for data center capacity globally. But honestly, energy independence alone doesn't address the full picture. Look, natural gas wells may not strain the grid directly, but they still aren't generated from a renewable resource.
So it's kind of like the strategy works, but only up to a point?
Exactly. Compare this to renewable energy models. Some companies are committing to wind or solar farms to power their data centers, with storage systems to manage intermittency. Those approaches aren't perfect either, but they move us closer to a genuinely sustainable energy ecosystem. TECfusions, meanwhile, is bridging the gap, but it's still, anchored in traditional energy sources.
It's true. I mean, using local natural gas can be seen as a transitional strategy, right? Would you call it that?
Yes, a transitional one, though I'd argue the next steps are crucial. Will they invest in renewables as part of their long-term plan, for instance? That's what we need to watch. This project reflects a common challenge in sustainability, balancing immediate operational needs against future environmental goals. And let's not forget the role of local communities here.
It's a tricky balance, no doubt. And I think it highlights a bigger question for the industry. If businesses want to claim sustainability wins, they've got to think beyond short-term solutions and align with broader renewable-focused strategies. Like you said, this is about more than just hitting operational goals. It's about leading the charge towards systemic change. Speaking of systemic changes in energy strategies, let's dive into this recent move by the EPA. They've issued an emergency waiver to permit E15 gasoline, gas blended with 15% ethanol, during the summer months. At first glance, it seems like a win. Cheaper fuel and potentially lower emissions. But it raises the question, what are the broader implications here?
Well, it's a significant step, especially with the ongoing fuel supply pressures. E15 is about 25 cents cheaper per gallon than E10, which is the gas most people are familiar with. That cost difference can end up saving consumers a lot over time, especially during summer months when fuel demand typically spikes.
Yeah, especially when people are road tripping and filling up the tank every other day, but, come on. This has to be more than just helping people save a few bucks, right?
Absolutely. Beyond the savings, there's a strategic component tied to energy security. Ethanol, which is what makes up that extra 5% in E15, is domestically produced from crops like corn. So, increasing its use reduces dependence on imported fossil fuels and supports American farmers.
Okay, so here's a win for agriculture. This reminds me of what we talked about in the first chapter, how industries and farmers can partner up for sustainable solutions. But there's got to be a catch somewhere. I mean, if this is so great, why hasn't it been a thing already?
You're right to dig deeper. E15 is limited by regulations during warmer months because of Reed vapor pressure controls. It's a measure of how much gasoline evaporates, which can contribute to smog. So, until now, E15 wasn't widely available during the summer. That's where this EPA waiver changes things. They're basically saying the supply situation is extreme enough to justify the change.
Got it. But doesn't that mean there could be air quality concerns? Are we trading smog issues for cheaper gas?
Not quite. The EPA has research showing that the emissions difference between E15 and E10 is negligible when you account for the 1 PSI waiver they extend to both. So, in theory, we're not making air quality worse. But, managing perception is key here because not everyone trusts these regulatory shifts.
Yeah, some folks will always think, if it's not year-round, there's got to be a reason, right?
Exactly. And I think this also highlights the importance of educating the public, not just on the safety and benefits of E15, but also on how it fits into the bigger picture. Renewable fuels aren't perfect, but they're an important transitional tool toward decarbonization.
Totally. And hey, I bet the farmers are loving this push. The ethanol in E15 mostly comes from corn, right? So is this a major win for agriculture or just a small boost?
It's definitely a boost, especially for regions where corn is a dominant crop. However, I'd frame it as part of a broader opportunity to diversify feedstocks for renewable fuels, things like biomass, waste oils, or even those intermediate crops we talked about earlier. Agriculture and energy have to grow together, just like Repsol and Bunge are doing in Europe.
It all kind of comes full circle, doesn't it? You've got renewable fuels bridging energy independence, environmental improvement, and economic support for farmers. Some real intersectional problem solving here. All right, Emily, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I think this chapter is a good reminder that incremental shifts, like an E15 waiver or improved agricultural practices, build up to systemic change. Tackling climate and energy challenges takes cooperation across industries and communities. It won't happen overnight, but every initiative plants a seed for a more sustainable future.
Well said. And that's a wrap for today's episode on renewable energy shifts. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep pushing for the future you want to see. See you soon.